Hi all, welcome to our last episode of Conversations on Sustainable Mountains podcast, a podcast to talk about the sustainable development of the mountains, brought to you by the Moving Project. My name is Serafin Pazos-Vidal, Senior Expert at the European Association for Innovation and Local Development, and today I'm here with Professor Mar Delgado. Hello, Mar.
Hello, Serafin. Pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you. Well, Mar, you are a full professor of the University of Cordoba in Spain, and I believe that since your early career, you're focused on sustainability and European policies for rural areas. Indeed, I'm aware you work for several European research projects, including the Moving Project that you coordinate. Actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that you are just about the only female professor from Spain coordinating a pan-European research project, isn't it?
Yes, to my knowledge, it is. I'm coordinating 3 projects, so I think there are not much researchers like me in Spain.
Great. Mar, just let's go into business a bit. This is the end of the project, of course, and there's solutions and lessons to be learned from the project. Just first general question, what is the place, in your view, of mountain areas in European and national policies today? Do they have the right place or more should be done?
First thing that we need to know is what is a mountain? After 4 years investigating on mountains, we realized that we don't have a unique definition. That is one of the main problems to have policies for mountain areas. First thing, we should know what are we talking about. And people said mountains are vertical. Yeah, right, they are. But we need to have a specific consideration in European policies. Most of the policies, strategies, or initiatives in Europe do not specifically mention mountains. So that means that about 1/3 of the EU territory that have specific geo-biophysical features, hosting most of valuable biodiversity hotspots, and providing essential public goods and services are just neglected in the policy making. And if we look at the national situation, very few countries, we can name maybe France or Romania, have specific mountain laws. A common agriculture policy has no specific mention to mountain areas, in spite of 18 of EU farmholds are considered mountain farmholds. So that is another example of the lack of consideration of mountains in policies. Just to close with a positive answer, we can say that cohesion policy is now focusing attention to mountain areas and providing some specific initiatives, but still we need much more.
Of course, the situation is not ideal, but I suppose there has been an evolution over the last 30 to 40 years in terms of policies that impacted the development and livability of mountain areas, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. I think we are increasing our attention to, let's say, remote rural areas. We can consider mountains as remote rural areas. And there's a more relevance to the needs of these areas. But still, we consider mountain areas as areas with natural constraints instead of areas of opportunity. Some of the results of the neglected policies in the last decades we can appreciate, like abandonment of these territories, migration, trade-off between conservation and development, lack of infrastructures, for instance, also closure of different education and healthcare services. Policies for mountain areas cannot be based on the number of inhabitants, but on the needs of these inhabitants and maybe the needs of nature, of the environment that created these areas. We need to understand the role of territorial stewardship in the fund allocation criteria, because it's not just all the goods and services provided by these areas, essential goods and services like water harvesting, clean air, CO2 sequestration, but also the private goods provided, like all the quality products that we have in these areas. So we need to understand the real needs of these territories. And in our case, in Moving, we have analyzed the future of mountains through value chains. I think it's very important that we reconsider policies and understand that these value chains are not only providing economic activity, but also social life, living mountains, vibrant mountains. So we need to understand this in the policies and create infrastructures and services that allow this development.
I think you already said that a bit, but maybe we could spell a bit further, if that's okay, the key challenges that still you think for the future current policies have in terms of development for mountain areas.
The key challenges is to address how can we make people live in mountain areas, attract people to mountain areas. In our research, one of the main results we had is that social aspects are key for the future of these areas. So we need to increase the number of people living in these areas and making or creating livelihood opportunities. Of course, climate change is a big issue. All the regions we have analyzed and mentioned as key drivers of change, those linked to changes in climatic conditions. But the second more important challenge was linked to demography, to the population, to lack of people, to lack of attractiveness of these areas. So I think the main issues we need to address are linked to social aspects, because with climate change we can do less. I mean, the solutions are, let's say, more global. But at the local level, at the national level, we need to start thinking on how to make these territories attractive for living. And that means infrastructure, technologies, research and development, but also needs thinking differently on the way of attracting people. We talk a lot about capacity building, but our research showed that we also need to do a big effort in community building, in increasing collective action in rural areas, and also to increase the agency and the bargaining capacity of the people living there.
Indeed. And actually now I'm going to get a bit more into the detail about the project results. As you know, the European institutions are discussing, in a way as we speak, the post-2027 EU policies after the European elections. So a lot of the new priorities have been formed. So this is ideal for moving, because the results of the project are actually finalized when the European Commission and the European Parliament institutions need them the most. So could you just provide an outline about the EU policy recommendations post-2027 for mountain areas coming from the moving project?
Sure, that has been one of our main goals. And the first thing we need to say is that we need specific policies for mountain areas. Mountain areas need to be specifically targeted at the policy level. And they need to be flexible policies to be adapted to very different contexts. We need the multi-level and multi-fund policies. We see an important silo approaches. At the European level, we can see that agri policies and regio policies don't talk to each other, and both are essential for these areas. Going to the national, local level, I think it's very important to put in place communication policies. We need communication policies for society, communication policies for policymakers. We need to make understand consumers, citizens, the real role of mountains and what they are providing, and then to make them aware that paying a premium for a mountain product is just paying for maintaining a way of living that benefits to all, the people in the mountains and the people not in the mountains. We also need to create this awareness in policymakers to understand the real needs of these areas. They need infrastructure, and as I said, not based on the number of inhabitants, maybe in the number of users, in the number of beneficiaries of all the public goods and services provided by mountains. But we also need affordable technologies. We need technologies for steepy, for slope areas. If we are talking about different crops, about livestock, wherever, we need to understand that in our current situation, market is not going to develop these technologies because they are not feasible. I mean, it's a real role of policies to do the research and development of the technologies needed for the value chains in mountain areas. We also need to do a bigger effort on connectivity. And it is also very important to have data, specific data for these areas, because they always say that policies are based on sound evidences and scientific evidences. But if we don't have data, we cannot take decisions. And if now we go to the very local level, we need to increase community building, not only capacity building. We need to have policies that boost collective action, that permit or allow the voices of the mountain inhabitants to be listened, to be recognized the real needs in the policy making.
Thank you, Mar. Of course, and now's the time from now on to make sure that the recommendations are put to good use by the project itself, but also by the different partners, including, of course, AEIDL, who basically very much use a lot of the policy recommendations. But I think before we conclude, I think it will be important to recognize a bit the long road that led to these policy recommendations in terms of a policy roadmap. Perhaps you could spell out a bit how this roadmap has been developed and how it looks like.
Our final objective was to deliver a policy roadmap and a number of recommendations for the future of mountain policies. So we have created a roadmap with 8 building blocks that try to show what should be the road for the future of these policies. It's an important thing from this roadmap is that it comes from the voices of more than 1,000 mountain stakeholders. So I think that's very important to recognize that has not been, let's say, a scientific exercise, but has been a multi-actor participatory exercise. So in this roadmap, we try to identify which are the main blocks that we need to change the situation of mountain areas. We hope that it will be taken by policymakers. Indeed, it was presented in the Moving Final Conference in mid-June in Brussels, and we hope that it would be taken. Among the main recommendations is that we need better governance for these areas, but also it's quite important that we need a right balance between the social and environmental aspects in mountain areas. There's no life without people in the mountains. We cannot forget that. European mountains are very anthropized. We need people to maintain and to preserve the ecological integrity of these territories. And these people need to have well-being opportunities. And for this livelihood and well-being opportunities, value chains play an essential role. They can unlock the power of mountain areas, as was one of moving mottos. We need these value chains because they create jobs, they provide incomes, but they also, through telecoupling, transfer products produced in mountain areas to lowlands, to cities, to even other countries. So it's very important to pay attention to all these topics.
Thank you, Mar. We are now in the moment that we will need to disseminate and promote the policy recommendations. And I think this podcast will help our listeners and colleagues to have a better understanding of the proposals for the Moving Project. So thank you very much for the time to share your thoughts with us. And thank you all for tuning in. Let's continue the journey to unlock the potential of mountain areas in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. It has been a real pleasure to coordinate this project, to work with such an amazing group of people from 23 mountain regions in Europe. And thanks to the more than 1,000 stakeholders that make possible to present these results. Thank you.